Okay, now I'm recording, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we don't have a lot of folks, but that's okay. Maybe some more folks will show up. All right. I'm going to mute all.
Right.
Wait a couple more minutes. Okay, I'll get started. Okay, can everybody hear okay? Can you see everything? Is that good enough? Somebody?
Yep,
it's good?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right.
Hey, Bob, if you don't mind, I don't know if you were already going to do this, but you should maximize your screen so that the PowerPoint takes up the whole screen.
Well, if I do that, yeah, like that?
Yes, there you go.
All right, is that good?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to mute everybody and I'm going to start. Allow, yeah, okay. All right. In the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. All right, I want to, it's fortunate in one sense and unfortunate in another. I'll be looking every once in a while. Okay. That we don't have more time to do basically the center portion, but there's so much of great importance when we do the sacraments, and that's what we're gonna do relatively soon. As you know, last week, the week before, we ended our examination of the Nicene Creed, which is a summary of the faith. And then last week we started looking at basically the moral aspects of it. And we looked at 3 chapters. Unfortunately, it'd be nice to spend a class on each chapter, but we just don't have the time. So we looked at the 2 great commandments, love God and love your neighbor. And then we started looking at the 10 commandments. And remember, the best way that I like to look at the commandments, and actually, I didn't do this for many, many years of my life. I just recently did in the last couple of years, start looking at the commandments every day. I have a little list of the 10 commandments. It's kind of interesting to read them frequently, just to keep in mind that this was the second most simplistic command from God of what it is that he wants us to do so that we can love him and we can love our neighbor. And it's really very simple. The original command to Adam and Eve is don't eat from the tree of good and evil. And then when they violated that, they went for centuries with all kinds of problems and a lot of personal sin leading up to the flood. And then it started over with Noah and his family. And then by the time we got to Moses, we get a much more detailed explanation of what God believes we need as his children to understand how to worship him, to love him, and then to love each other. So he came up with a 10. And the reason I'm talking about that is because at one point very soon, after Christmas, we'll be looking at the commandment on reconciliation. We used to be more frequently called confession. And we'll get into details, but I just wanted to highlight something to you now to help show why it's important to read these chapters on the commandments. Because the way we as Catholics attempt to prepare for communion is to examine our conscience. Now, there's several ways you can examine your conscience. You can just say, have I done anything bad? Does anything jump out at me that might have offended God? Or do I know of things that happened? Do I know that I did something that I'm really feel sorry for and know was wrong? But most of us like to have a formula that help us kind of review an examination of conscience. And for those of you who are adults and will be receiving your first communion since you were baptized in a Protestant denomination, one of the best ways to prepare for that, and the way often a priest who you go to and tell him, this is my first confession, will use the commandments as a guide. So it's very useful to be aware of the commandments and to be familiar with them. And at almost every place I've ever been where there is a priest hearing confession, there's usually relatively nearby sort of a pamphlet holder that has some form of an examination of conscience. The two most common ways of examining your conscience are to look at the 7 deadly sins and say, did I commit any of these or subcomponents? Or look at the 10 commandments. And Father DeSalle has produced a beautiful little, it's purple or deep pink listing, and they're by the confessionals. They're also in the office. And when we get to the examination, when we get to this review of confession, I'll sort of reiterate that it'd be nice to have one. Why I'm telling you this is because we don't examine our conscience in great detail if we simply say, have I done one of the 10? Have I not believed that the Lord God is the only God? Have I believed in other gods? And that's a big commandment. A more simple one is, have I killed anyone? The 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Have I committed adultery? Well, those would be relatively easy in your examination of conscience to check off. No, I haven't done that. I didn't kill anybody. But as I mentioned last week, there's subcomponents. There are nuances. Certainly when you look at the Sermon on the Mount, you find that they're related to the 10 commandments, but they're more individualistically oriented. They're calling us to a greater degree of love and to a greater degree of obedience to the Father. And all of these things are designed to make our life good. The commandments are not to impose a dominance over us and not allow us to do something we want to do. They are there to protect us from doing things that will harm us and harm our relationship with God and harm our relationship with our neighbor. So when you get this little handout, it gives you a much greater depth to what you may or may not be aware of that might offend God. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll read you what Father DeSalle has mentioned as things that fall under the heading of one of the commandments. Now, not everything is mortal, so many things are venial. And as we get into the confession, I'll tell you more about how you differentiate, and it can be different for different people. Something that could be a venial sin for me might be a mortal sin for, say, a priest or for a bishop. Something that might be a mortal sin for me might be a venial sin for a younger person or whatever. So it's based on knowledge, it's based on culpability and where you are. But here's an example of what I'm trying to share with you. Last week, we looked at the first commandment. The first commandment says, I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no strange gods before me. Now, here are some of the subsets of that Father DeSalle has beautifully broken out for us. So he asks, have I worshiped or prayed to other deities, pagan gods, or the devil? That's pretty much the way we thought of it when you read the whole commandment. Have I participated in satanic rituals or occult practices? Have I made anything more important than God in my life? And there's one that's relatively easy to fall into if you suddenly make a God out of money, security, power, other people, putting myself ahead of God. Another one is, do I seek to love him with my whole heart, meaning God? So have I been angry with God? That would violate it. Did I despair? Despair means you have no hope. Or on the other side of it, presumes God's mercy. Do I say God can't help me? That's despair. Or do I just presume, well, I can do this because next Saturday I can go to confession? That's presumption. Do I give God time every day in prayer? So that's calling us to examine our conscience, see if we're spending time with God. Have I received communion in a state of mortal sin? Would violate the first commandment. Have I deliberately told a lie or withheld a mortal sin from the priest in confession? Have I dissented from defined Catholic doctrine? Did I disregard important liturgical norms of the church? Do I deny my Catholic faith? Did I fail to defend my Catholic faith? Am I willfully ignorant of basic doctrines of the faith? Have I been prideful? Have I eaten or drunk in excess the sin of gluttony? Have I been irresponsible steward of creation? All those would fall under the first commandment. Another example would be the fifth commandment. Thou shalt not kill. You think, well, I didn't kill anybody. We've always pretty well looked at that. But have I done these things? Have I intentionally physically harmed anyone? Have I had an abortion or encouraged or assisted anyone in doing so? Have I engaged in any way in sins against human life, such as artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization, so on? Have I participated or publicly approved euthanasia? Do I hate anyone? Have I been quarrelsome or resentful? Have I insulted anyone or called them harsh or profane names? Have I unjustly or intentionally harassed or made fun or ridiculed anyone? Have I unjustly used physical force or my position of authority or power to force someone to do something against their will? Have I held a grudge or failed to forgive? And so on. So that gives you an idea of what I'm trying to express as we go through. So last week we looked at the first two commandments, and we looked at the first commandment, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no strange gods before me. And we looked at the second and third commandment. We looked at the three commandments. Do not use the Lord's name in vain, and keep the Sabbath holy. So we've looked at the first three commandments, and just know there are subsets to it. Now tonight we'll look at the others. Chapter 18 deals with the fourth and fifth commandment. Chapter 19 deals with the sixth and ninth commandment. And chapter 20th deals with the seventh and 10th commandment. So that's what we'll be going through this evening as we progress. So this chapter, looking at the fourth and fifth commandment. This is a very beautiful commandment. And again, Christ was very adamant in some of the things that the Pharisees were doing. And I'll give you one example. There's a beautiful example where Christ gets really upset with the Pharisees. So there was a practice in the law. And by the way, they had broken it down as well. They had not just the 10 commandments at the time of Christ, they had 613 rules and regulations that related to the law. So they came up with a law that said, if you want to promise your inheritance to God, you may do so kind of like any time in your life. And when you declare that whatever I have left at the end of my life, I'm going to give to God, or in their case, to the temple, and any money that was left over when a person died would be given to the temple. They call that korban. And Jesus criticized the Pharisees because a Pharisee would tell a person, if you have elderly parents and they're in need, and you have money that you're holding in korban to give to the temple after you die, you can deny them the money. You can just tell your parents, too bad, I've already given all my money away to God after I die. I'll use as much as I want while I'm alive, but whatever's left I've given to God in korban. So too bad, mom and dad, if you need medical attention, or if you need a new toaster, or if your car's broken, too bad, I've given all my money to the temple. And Christ pointed out that that was a man identified concept, but they were in fact honoring that while dishonoring this fourth commandment, honor your father and mother. And he called them on that. So you can see the importance of honoring your father and mother to Jesus and how he saw it was being abused. So here's some of the things that deal with the fourth commandment. So as children, we have a responsibility to our parents, and that means obedience to their lawful authority. A parent is the guardian of a child. The child is has been given to the parents by God at birth, through conception and birth. And the parents have a responsibility, but also the child has a responsibility. So as children, as we grow up, we're responsible toward our parents. And as we get older, we also have responsibility to our parents when they become senior citizens. So many people today in our modern society just park their parents in a nursing home and just say, well, they've got money, they can pay for it, or I'll pay for it. And then those caretakers can take care of them. Just put them in a nursing home, and then maybe we'll visit them at Christmas and Easter, but we don't have to interact with them. Well, that really is not honoring your father and mother. We have tremendous responsibility. I remember when Beverly's father died, it was quite sudden. He went to sleep one night and didn't wake up the next day. Her mother came out to spend time with us, and it was right about the time of our daughter's wedding, and we had a nice visit. She stayed, I think, a month or so, but she felt she had to go back to her home in Kansas, and she went back and was tremendously lonely and was quite frightened being alone in that house and so on. So we invited her to come out and move in and live with us, which is what she did. She sold her house, her property, and she moved out. And we made our guest room into her room, and we enjoyed having her live with us for 2 years. After she got comfortable with that, she also felt she wanted a little more independence. So she was able to move to a senior citizen facility where she had her own apartment that was just a couple of miles from her house. And she lived there until she died there. And we visited her frequently. And as she got a little bit older and with a little more dementia, Beverly would go over multiple times during the day just to make sure she took her medication in accordance with the time schedule that she was supposed to. So honoring your father and mother goes as a child all the way until they die. And then after they die, you honor your mother and father by offering masses for the repose of their soul and for praying for them that they'll be freed from purgatory. So that responsibility goes. Also under the fourth commandment, when you're, as I said, you have responsibility for your parents. Another part of the fourth commandment, parents have responsibility to provide for the natural, spiritual, and supernatural needs of their children. So as parents, you have to take care of their physical needs. You have to raise them to be good citizens. Child doesn't know anything about paying taxes or voting or going and doing jury duty or any other responsibilities, obeying the law, the traffic laws, the pedestrian laws, all the things that are important that make society function. We as parents must teach to our children. We also have to provide for their intellectual development. We have to send them to school. If we can afford a private school or a church school, a Catholic school, that's even better. But if not, you need to get them to CCD if they go to a public school in order to give them their Catholic education. So that's the spiritual development. You have to give them the sacraments. You ensure they're baptized early on. Make sure they go to First Confession and First Holy Communion. Make sure they're confirmed in the 8th grade. And if they get married, ensure they get married in the church and receive the sacrament, or if they go into holy orders. And if they get sick, then they receive the sacrament of the sick. So you provide for that as parents under the 4th commandment. Again, as I mentioned, you have to teach them to be good citizens, obey the laws, particularly paying taxes and that sort of thing. So we have to set an example as parents. That's under the 4th commandment. We have to raise them properly. We have to raise them to get along with their siblings and with us and with others in the school environment and in the playground. So we really have to do that. One of the best ways for you to be a good parent is to be a loving spouse. Children need to see their spouses in love. They need to see the example of their parents, particularly in prayer. I am convinced from my years of experience watching children grow up in families that there's sadly an untaught necessity that the role of the father in bringing the religion to the children is very important. If children are raised in a family where only the mother worships, only the mother goes to mass, or only the mother is involved in the church and does things and participates and teaches CCD and all that, and the father does the minimum or nothing, particularly if he just does the minimum requirements of just attending mass, the child will often leave the church, particularly when they become teenagers or when they go off to school. Very, very common. Now, often they will come back, particularly when they get married. They'll come back because they'll have a need for the sacrament, or if they have children, they'll come back for their baptism. But sadly, if the father is not giving an example, children are not as likely to stay in the faith and never leave as they would in a household where both the mother and father are active. So I commend it to you in families that you both participate, that you don't each go a separate way, each join a kind of a group that supports your gender rather than doing things as a couple. Coupleness is very powerful, both to your children and to your community. So that's a very, very important part of the 4th commandment. The 5th commandment is really very interesting. And there's a lot of debate and struggle with how do we live out the 5th commandment, because it looks so simple. Thou shalt not kill doesn't simply, yes, question.
Sorry, I was on mute before. I was trying to ask a question. This is Gopal. So with the 4th commandment and the 1st commandment, how does one reconcile, say, if they were ever in a situation where, say, they're coming from another faith or they're coming from another denomination that their parents don't follow and their parents may not agree with, yet, still join the church?
Sure. That's a wonderful question. You honor your father and mother as a child all your life. If you choose to go to a different faith experience, that's your choice for your salvation and for your family. You love them, you try to explain it to them, but you don't you don't get in, you don't get into arguments and fights and everything else. You just explain the best you can and hope they'll be supportive. But you're not violating the commandment if they don't choose the same faith as you. You see what I mean? It's if you're in the faith and your child should honor you, then they should stay in the Catholic faith. But if you're from a different faith and you choose the Catholic faith and your parents don't, then they're the ones that are not following that particular commandment because they're not Catholic and they don't have to follow it and they're not expected to. But you would be expected to follow it and raise your children that way. That's the difference. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Thou shalt not kill, as I said, seems pretty simple. There's a need for self-defense. We always have the right to self-defense. That's part of human natural law, that you have a right to defend yourself against threats to your life. You are even permitted to take another life in self-defense if that's the only choice that's available. So that self-defense is a critical part of natural law, and the church accepts that. Now, you can choose not to defend yourself, and that's pacifism, and that's okay as well. There's nothing wrong with that. But the self-defense theory goes beyond yourself. So I have a right to defend myself, but also the state has a right to help defend me against threats to me. So we are allowed to create a police force. We're allowed to arm the police. We are allowed to give the police the authority to use deadly force if that's the last resort and if they're defending either themselves in self-defense or some other part of society. So that is a natural aspect of living in a society. You carry that to a national level, and nations that are very powerful and wealthy, like the United States, have the right, well, all nations have the right to defend their nation from threats, from external threats, from another country attacking them. And so we have armed forces, and we arm them, and we train them. We give them rules of engagement, and we give them the Geneva Convention and all of the things that go along with that. But if you're in an armed conflict and you're a combatant and you have a weapon and your enemy has a weapon and he's trying to kill you, then you have a right to use that force as a last resort. Now, we even carried it further. Example was the Vietnam War. We were asked by our country to go to the South Vietnamese part of the world to defend them who were unable to defend themselves against what we perceived was an aggression from not only the North, but more importantly from other major communist powers that were using smaller countries as proxies to expand their international power. So we could go there and defend the South Vietnamese and use justifiable force. I have no qualms with my 2 tours in Vietnam. I was an infantry officer. I was in combat. I saw people killed. It was a terrible thing. War is the last resort. It is never glorious or glamorous. The movies have made it into something that it's never been. And no one's ever been to war that I know of really wanted to be there or was happy and thought it was a great thing. It just isn't. But with that in mind, we have a dilemma as to how a nation should decide whether or not to use deadly force. And it's a theory, it's not dogma. The church basically teaches what I've taught, that right of self-defense, the right of community to organize themselves with police, and the right of nations to have armed forces. But the question is, should the United States get involved in another country? Should they send troops over and participate in wars in other places? So there was a theory among theologians that came up with 4 criteria that these theologians believed should be in place before a nation went to war. And St. Pope John Paul II was very much in agreement with this concept. So the question that whether I should go to another war or not, you ask yourself, the nation must be defending its right in a grave matter. So the person that I'm going to help must be in grave danger. It can't be an economic thing. It can't be a border squabble. There has to be grave matter. Most likely their populace was being killed. They couldn't defend themselves. Also, has everything been done prior to going to war, and war is the last resort? This is where Pope John Paul II challenged the United States government when they were thinking about going into the Iraq War against Saddam Hussein. And he argued, along with some of the theologians in Rome, that there were still more things that could be done through the United Nations, through other treaties, through other means, diplomatic means, to avoid sending troops from the United States to Iraq to fight Saddam Hussein. He never accepted that we had reached that threshold, that it was the last resort. The American theologians, and obviously the American president, felt, and I forget how many, there were 16 UN resolutions, that each of which were turned down by Iraq or were ignored by Iraq. You know, that at a certain point, the leaders gave up and said, we've done everything we can. He's not going to obey any international rules, so we're going to go to war. So that was a debate. Also, the war must be waged under the dictates of natural law. That means you protect non-combatants. One of the things that's very dangerous about war is what we have so callously labeled collateral damage. Classic example, there's an enemy headquarters in an apartment complex. In the same apartment complex, there's 25 families, and they're living there. So the government decides to send a plane over and bomb the apartment complex, killing everyone in it. And oh, by the way, I'm sorry, those 10 families are collateral damage. The church says that's morally reprehensible. That's immoral. You cannot justify, the end doesn't justify the means. You cannot kill those 10 people just to get at the enemy's headquarters. And that's what was unfortunate, because in so many wars in the last several decades, the opposing force would do that. They would set headquarters in schools or in hospitals or in other places where there was a large populace around it, causing, by definition, the direct killing of innocent civilians. The church says innocent life may never be sacrificed as a justifiable means. So therefore, all the rules of international law, the Geneva Convention, when people surrender and are disarmed, you can't kill them, and so on. And lastly, the war must be stopped as soon as possible, soon as satisfaction can be given by the unjust aggressor. So that's a just war theory. It's out there. It gives us some guidance. There was an interesting theory using the just war theory about nuclear weapons. And the question is, from a religious point of view, is it morally acceptable to use nuclear weapons? The answer is it's morally acceptable to have and develop nuclear weapons. And that is a wonderful tool in deterrence. But it would be immoral to drop a nuclear weapon on another country. And in fact, the church sees that World War II, it was immoral because, by definition, thousands or millions of innocent civilians are going to be killed in that explosion. So it creates a real problem for a moral theologian and for moral leaders to make decisions. Having them has been very great as a deterrent, because the Russians know we have them, the Chinese know that we have them, we know that they have them, and that's been because of mutually assured destruction. It's prevented either side from using them. But for someone to suddenly declare, well, I'm tired of this war. It's been going on in Afghanistan forever, so I'm going to go and nuke them. That would be morally reprehensible. So those are the kinds of things that I'm telling you about because they're relevant to our life. They're relevant to the age we live in. They're relevant to the people around us and the things we face. Another issue in Fifth Commandment is capital punishment. Very interesting situation here. The church basically teaches that it is lawful to take the life of a criminal who was tried by his peers in a jury, found guilty of a crime that was worthy of capital punishment according to the law, and that the person went through the appeals, and when all else fails, they could be put to death by the state. It was very interesting that St. Pope John Paul II basically did not believe in capital punishment, did not think capital punishment as a theologian, not as a pope. He was not speaking as the pope, but he was speaking as a theologian. And he thought that a person should be incarcerated for, if necessary, the rest of their life. And he said in particularly Western countries that could afford to incarcerate a person and could secure them so that they wouldn't come back and kill more people. That was one of the justifications. This guy's a murderer, and if we don't kill him, he's going to get loose and kill more innocent people. The Pope said in sophisticated countries like the United States, we should be able to protect against that and not take his life because the Pope wanted the individual to have every opportunity to seek pardon and be reconciled with God before death. And if the state created the death, that could sometimes not happen. So there was that debate, and he wrote a letter. I read that he wrote a letter to every governor of a state in which a capital punishment was about to be executed and pleaded for clemency or for remitting it to life in prison. I don't think it swayed many governors, but he certainly did that and felt that strongly about it. So those are some things that are involved with that. Here's some other sins in general of the Fifth Commandment. Obviously, abortion and euthanasia. Euthanasia, for those who don't know, is the extermination of elderly. The state decides that your life is not worth living anymore, so they will provide a means of death. They will either allow you to kill yourself, or they will do physician-assisted suicide, which in some countries is very prevalent. In Holland, for instance, there was a big euthanasia movement. So those would be against the Fifth Commandment. To physically harm someone, failure to maintain your own health, to hate or to have unrighteous anger against someone violates the Fifth Commandment. If you lead someone to serious sin, or if you destroy someone's reputation. That is really, really sinful, and people don't think anything about it today with social media, particularly young people, and we're having tragic consequences where some young people are committing suicide because someone has destroyed their reputation or said things about them that aren't true, and they feel they can't live with their friends anymore, and they commit suicide. Very, very tragic. So that's pretty much of the Fifth Commandment. Now, the Sixth and Ninth Commandment, these are the sexually oriented sins that we have a tendency to do. The thing that's so fascinating about the way the human body was created and the way God has caused us to be is that the sexual urge is very, very similar to the desire for food and drink. We know we have a craving for food. We know we have a need for drink. If you don't get drink for a while, you get very thirsty. And if you get very thirsty, your body does very strange things. You can also get very hungry. You can starve. It takes a long time, starving to death. Those people that went on starvation diets for suicide, now some of them were in political reasons for protest. It takes 20 some days for a person to completely starve to death. You dehydrate before normally you would die from dehydration. before starvation. So most people on a starvation diet don't stop drinking. But these, the 6th and 9th commandment are about your appetite for sexual pleasure. And the whole purpose, obviously, that God gave us this appetite, and he gave us the means for fulfilling it within the proper bounds of lawful marriage between a man and a woman that have been around since the very beginning. That is the very proper place to satisfy those appetites. And they're there to cause you to want to have relations in order for he to be able to procreate with you by putting the life into the product of husband and wife's loving embrace with the beginning of life. So there's a desire, there's a need for it, there's a desire for it, and obviously it can be done outside of those bounds, and that's where we get into trouble. So the 6th and 9th commandment are violated through adultery, and adultery is when one of the parties is married and having sexual relationship with another person who is married or even single. If one of the parties is married and they have a relationship with someone else, that's adultery. A fornication is between two people who aren't married, but is having sex outside of marriage. So that would be another. One of the commandments that it talks about is coveting. Coveting meaning you want for your own. You want to make your neighbor's wife your own. And there's a lot of activities that fall under these two major commandments. They actually specify not to commit adultery and not to covet. And there's two extreme attitudes towards the marital act. One is hedonism, and this seems to be the direction, sadly, our country, our nation is growing into. That I remember Nike used to have a commercial, and basically it just said, if it feels good, do it. And that's kind of where we are in the sexual pleasure aspects of life. If it feels good, do it. Sexual pleasure can be done with people outside of the bond of marriage, and it can be done for self-gratification. Now, one of the beautiful things that I've heard contrasting the state's views or the national or the secular version of this and the moral version. Secular version says use people to gain things. So if you want to go up the ladder, you want to be successful, you want to be rich, then you use your people at the office, you climb up, you defeat them, you talk them down, you gain their spaces, you use people everywhere necessary to gain more power and more money. The church says use things and love people. So you love things if you're in society and the culture, but you use people where we should be loving people and using things. And a person should never be considered a thing. A spouse is not a thing. A spouse is not something that you own and you can abuse. A spouse is a person to be loved. Now, the other opposite of anything goes in the sexual realm is prudishness. This is the emphasis on the Puritans. You know, the Scarlet Letter, that wonderful book or story written years and years ago about the person that committed adultery and had to walk around with a big A on their clothing. Prudishness is that sex is evil or dirty. It comes from dualism. The Gnostic dualism from the early centuries basically thought that anything material was bad. So there could be nothing worse than two human beings physically coming together in a marital embrace. That's flesh on flesh. That's material on material. and that's not spiritual. The spirit was good, the flesh was bad. So if you get prudishness, you get that Platonic view. The body is the tomb of the soul. The object of death is to remove the soul from the body so that this impure body can dissolve and fall apart. Again, dualism. The Cathars, the Albigensians, and then later the Puritans were all in this realm of seeing sexuality as prudish. And if they had been able to dominate, we would not have survived very long because no one would have had any children. Now, the church teaches that the marital act is a gift from God. It's wonderful. And it's so proper within marriage. It's one of the fruits of marriage. It's the joy. And there's nothing wrong within marriage. And it's also the way to be part of God's creative power. It only becomes sinful when it's performed outside of marriage. As we said, adultery, fornication, and self-satisfaction, masturbation. Now, I'm going to talk about, just for a second, and this is the dogma. This is the teaching of the church. And it's not easy. Hang on one second. Let's see. I think I might have a copy. No. I have a copy downstairs, but the book, the church, the Holy Father often writes documents to the church at large on faith and morals. And when the Second Vatican Council was ongoing, Pope Paul, who took it over from John the 23rd, who started it, had an issue to deal with that came up, and he decided that he would not include this issue in the revision of church doctrines, which was ongoing in the Second Vatican Council. He decided to keep it to himself and formed a commission to study it and give him a recommendation and then give a decision from himself as Pope on faith and morals. And here was the dilemma. Prior to 1935, no Protestant or Catholic community, no Protestant church accepted birth control as being licit, approved, acceptable. And as you know, there were problems with that, with unwanted pregnancies, and there was all kinds of issues involved. But in 1935, the Anglicans got together for their every 4-year convention called the, I don't remember right now, but anyway, they had their Anglican convention, and they debated and concluded that birth control, artificial birth control, would be permitted to a husband and wife who had one or more what we would now call mentally challenged children. So if you had a child with some serious retardation or other mental problems, particularly if you had more than one, then they would be permitted to use artificial birth control and not produce any more such children. That was called the Lambeth Conference, 1936. Within a very few years, that went from that exception to total acceptance of birth control for everyone, particularly in the Protestant side. The Catholic Church always felt that that was immoral, that you should not prevent God from being able to participate in the union of husband and wife, the marital embrace, in those instances when they resulted in the beginning of life, so that God could create a new person. They should not be artificially denied, removing God's ability to do what he was hoping to do in that situation. So that was the predominant view until the 1960s, when the pill came to be acceptable. The pill was a means of artificially confusing the woman's body into believing that she wasn't fertile and causing any cells that had united from staying within the woman's womb, and before they're even hardly visible, they would be aborted. And the question was, since this was a medicine and a medical condition, was it acceptable? And unfortunately, at the time when this debate was going on and the conference was going on, people got used to seeing the media come forward and present all kinds of things that were going on in the conference. So there was two groups within the church that looked at this and said, and by the way, they had very scientific people. They had gynecologists, they had researchers, they had medical doctors, they had husbands and wives, they had nurses, all kinds of people making up these committees that were very well known and very well renowned in this field. And one group that wrote the majority opinion said they felt that artificial birth control was a good and it should be allowed for Catholics. This minority report said, no, it should not. The Pope, and unfortunately, both were publicly out in the media before the Pope wrote his decision. He wrote his decision in this little book called Humani Vitae. And in that book, he wrote in 1968 the dangers of what would happen if artificial birth control was permitted in marriage. And he talked about the loss of respect for women, husbands would be unfaithful, and on and on and on, all the things that have come true in spades since his prediction. But he wrote that document and said, it is not acceptable. It's not morally right. And of course, many, many, many Catholics ignored that document, accepted that the theologians were right and that the Pope and the church were wrong. And it's just spiraled out of control. I think as many Catholics practice birth control as Protestants do. But that doesn't make it right. It just makes it not following the doctrine. And if you get a chance to read the document, it's very short. It's like 16 short pages. But it's a fascinating presentation of what the Pope foresaw would happen if that became licit. And in fact, it has. And now, as a result of that breaking down, we're seeing all the other things in the sexual arena get into places that no Pope would have ever dreamed in my lifetime we would be today, with all of these different isms that are out there now. It's just mind-boggling. So that's part of the 6th and the 9th commandment. They also, the opposite of the vice is the virtue. So what is the virtue of the 6th and 9th commandment? Well, the virtue is chastity. Chastity exists prior to marriage, but chastity exists within marriage. That means you're only having a relationship with your spouse. You are chaste within the spouse, within a marriage. Sins against chastity can be in the thought. Remember, a sin is a thought, word, or deed. And so you can have thoughts of sexual experiences with someone else and dwell in it and meditate on it, and that would be sinful. Modesty causes us to abstain from actions, words, and looks that are likely to arouse unlawful sexual appetites. The way we dress, the way people dress has an attraction to the opposite sex, and it can be very sexually stimulating. So there's some possible situations that can be avoided. When tempted, remember, there is no goodness without effort. We're all tempted, and it's through overcoming this temptation that we grow in virtue. The bigger the temptation, the more graces God will give you to resist it. You're never, never, never tempted beyond your capacity to resist. And no temptation can cause you to sin. All right. The 7th and 10th commandments, this is about stealing. So we'll end with this. We'll go a little bit quicker. So they're dealing with stealing and coveting your neighbor's goods. Thou shalt not steal or covet thy neighbor's good. The two commandments are related. Now, stealing is to voluntarily take or keep something that belongs to another. If you borrow your neighbor's lawnmower because yours is broken, that's borrowing. But if you borrow it and never take it back, and he wants it back, that's stealing. So you can actually steal by deed or by thought. You can plan a robbery and go through all aspects of it and willfully think about stealing something, and that would be wrong. Theft is stealing by stealth. Robbery is stealing by violence. So usually people rob a bank at gunpoint, but you can steal something over the internet, or you can steal something by not paying somebody or using other stealthy matters. As I mentioned, borrowing is totally different. Ways to break the commandment is by breaking an oath. If you make an oath and swear by it, that's breaking the commandment. Deliberately damage someone else's property. Believe it or not, cheating is a sin. Boy, when I grew up, my parents just really hammered this home. If you cheat, you're known as a cheater. You cheat once, you'll always be known as a cheater. You'll always be called a cheater. Today, cheating has become almost acceptable. You violate it by underpaying employees for their work, or accepting bribes, or accepting stolen goods, or keeping found articles. I remember a friend of mine played golf one time, and he was coming in late in the evening. It was dark. It was out in California. It was getting real dark, and he could barely see. And as he walked up on the 18th green, there was this big wallet. And he picked it up, and it was chock full of $100 bills and credit cards, and it was just overflowing. And he walked right into the clubhouse, went right up to the pro, and gave him the wallet, because he knew that would be stealing to keep all that money. Just then, the car came screaming up outside, slammed the brakes on, skidded across the rocks. Guy jumped out, ran in there, and you knew who he was and what he was looking for, his wallet. But there again, my friend could have kept it, put it in his golf bag, gone in, left. He didn't live in California. No one would have ever known, but he could not, because he was a good moral Catholic. We also have to be sorry for our sin. And if you steal something, you have to make restitution. Now, even stealing can include intellectual property, even CDs and things. If you buy, Office for your laptop and it's only for you, and you put it in all your kids' laptops, that's using intellectual property. Obviously, you can't pay that back to whatever it is. But anyway, you can give money to the poor. Or sometimes if you go and confess that to a priest, he'll say, well, you've got to make restitution for that. And sometimes you have to do it in other ways. But you are responsible for making good anything you acquire. Stolen articles need to be repaid with profit that's been acquired. So that concludes those three. That concludes our very brief and very quick overview of the commandments. And we remind you at the very, very beginning, I think I put this chart up at the very, very beginning. I don't think I talked about it. We will not meet next Monday or the Monday after that. So the 21st and the 28th are holidays. We will not have RCIA on those nights so that we can all enjoy our families. And many people traveled before COVID. So there was a lot of things that could be done during those times. So we will not meet again until January January the 4th, and then we'll look at two more commandments, the 8th and the commandments of the church. So we'll finish up our look at the commandments. We have 3 sessions, and then after that, we will start on the sacraments. So with that in mind, I will end with the Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Amen. Beverly and I wish you and all of your loved ones and your family a most blessed Christmas and the happiest of New Year's. And we look forward so much to seeing you in the new year, and look forward to hopefully going through and getting all this done by Easter, so we can have a wonderful wonderful Easter vigil and everybody can come into the church. Anybody have any questions or any comments?
Merry Christmas, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas.
I think I got everybody tonight. Anybody else have anything? Alex, come in. Okay, that's it. All right. Well, God bless you all. I'll see you in, I guess, 3 weeks.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation. I love it. All right. Good night.